unless you've got no images out there, which, let's face it, most people have some images, you're at risk of being deepfaked. And that's the world we're now living in. Women all the time are having to, we manage our lives all the time, trying to avoid threats or trying to avoid street harassment, or we think we're trying to avoid a risk of rape. And we're now also having this threat of being deepfaked as well at any moment. And there is very little we can do about it. It doesn't matter to me if I'm deepfaked. I'm older, I'm established, blah, blah, blah. Younger women, it's a real threat to them. And the thing is, you say, people don't know whether they're real images or not. Many people have never actually even heard of deepfakes. Young girls talk about how actually being deepfaked is a worse threat than having their kind of own nudes shared, because with the deepfakes, they've got no control whatsoever at how they're, pictured, positioned, and they're often much more abusive. So it's worse, actually, is what some young women are saying, than their real nudes being shared.
When we talk about digital divides, I worry that the gap between people using it as an answer engine versus using it to help provide you with better thinking, that's going to be the problem.
We need to understand always what the funding model is and what is the political system behind any tool that our kids are using.
AI is not some machine god somewhere up in the sky. It's a physical building on someone else's land, drinking up someone's water.
You can make a robot to sort of be anthropomorphically credible. People, when they have a conversation with it, they think there's a human mind behind it.
What if virtual reality can be our training platform where we can interact with others without actually hurting them?
And we're now at this next sort of inflection point where perhaps the systems that we're trying to produce are going to take over the decision to commission violence in the first place.
It's not a technology problem, it's a leadership problem right now.
It's one thing to overcome death for human beings, but we're dealing with an age of AI where maybe it won't even be human beings that conquer death. It'll be sort of like AI that takes over the world.
What kind of society do we want AI to help us build? Because if we don't answer that intentionally, these other forces are going to answer it for us.
Welcome to a new season of Purposeful Empathy, a show dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. This season, we're exploring empathy in the era of AI.
Together with my expert guests, we dive into armed conflict, ed tech, neocolonialism, transhumanism, online abuse, the future of work, and so much more.
You don't want to miss a single episode, so hit that subscribe button now. And if you like what you hear, post a comment and share the show.
Hi, there's a lot of noise about AI right now, predictions and promises and plenty of warnings, and I know how hard it is to make sense of things. I've spent the past 15 years studying empathy, and what I want to know is how AI will impact how we treat one another. So I decided to speak with a variety of AI experts, and the result is this 20-part series exploring how artificial intelligence will reshape our society and our relationships. There's a ton at stake, so I hope you'll join me on this journey. Today, my guest is Dr. Clare McGlynn, a professor of law at Durham University, and she's also one of the world's leading experts on image-based sex abuse, deepfake pornography, and the legal regulation of online harm. In this conversation, we explore how sex tech is reshaping power, consent, and sexual violence, why image-based sexual abuse is far more psychologically devastating than most people realize, and that's not just for girls and women, but also for boys and men. How the normalization of violent pornography and relationships with chatbots are reshaping relationships and expectations around sex, and what it would take to build a more empathic legal system and society in the age of AI. If you want to understand how technology is transforming intimacy, consent, dignity, violence, and gender relations, this show is for you.
So welcome to the show, Clare.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
I am excited to have this conversation because I think it is so important. And as I mentioned before I hit record, I'm a little bit terrified. So with that, let me start here. You're a professor of law at Durham University in the UK, a leading expert on violence against women and girls and gender equality, with expertise specifically in legal regulation of pornography, image-based sexual abuse, cyber flashing, other forms of online abuse, and you work closely with survivors to strengthen the law. I mean, amazing, amazing work. I'd like to know, besides the bio, what you'd like to share about yourself so that the viewers and listeners can get to know Clare a little bit as a human. And then also what led to the work that you're doing today.
Thank you. Well, I mean, you mentioned what led me to the work. You mentioned they're working with survivors, and that's what drives me, and that's what leads me to carry on doing some of this kind of difficult work, as you talked about, and that's particularly because. As well, I work with lots of survivors, but especially younger women. And of course, as an academic in the university, I teach and work with a lot of younger women. And I just think in society generally, younger women's voices just don't get heard very often. We often dismiss young women just because, but just because we've got interest in lots of different things doesn't mean to say, our voices on some of these issues shouldn't be heard. So I think for me, yeah, that's the other part of that bio of the work, is really wanting to work with young women particularly and get their voices out into this world, because yeah, too often they're dismissed. We just don't take what happens to them seriously.
It's so interesting. Just before getting on this call, I was watching a clip from Amanpour, and it's with an author that's got a new front cover story in the Atlantic, why young men are turning against feminism. And I think the article is something like why women need to shut up. Right? The manosphere is, really condemning everything that has anything to do with female qualities and females holding power. So I know where your work is situated. It's hard to believe, through the three waves of feminism, that we're still at this moment, like where there's this huge pendulum swing going the other direction.
Yeah. Oh, it's very difficult times. And actually the divergence of young men and young women's views politically is a real struggle, isn't it? Because I think for someone like me, I'm in my mid-50s. I think I've grown up with the idea that things will keep on progressing. We'll get more equality. Even if it's really slow, it'll still keep happening. But that's just not the case at the moment, I don't think, unfortunately. And it's particularly our young women who are having to deal with that.
And then we enter the era of AI. So I became very interested in having conversations with experts from different pockets of the AI conversation, because I really think all citizens have to start paying attention to the implications downstream from this, because decisions are being made without our involvement at all. And so I have had some outrageously eye-opening conversations on all sorts of topics. And I think the one that we're going to have today is extremely important, especially if we have daughters in our lives, but also if we have sons in our lives, So let's start at the very beginning. What is image-based sexual abuse? I know it was formerly known as revenge porn. And I also would love to know why the new framing of it matters. So what is this? What's this going on?
So image-based sexual abuse, that's a term that my colleague Erica Rackley and I came up with nearly 10 years ago now. And it was because there was, as you say, this revenge porn that people were talking about at the time, which tended to be, the ex-boyfriend who shared intimate images without the woman's consent. And that was a really big problem that was coming to light. But that term doesn't describe that event, in the sense of revenge suggests the woman's done something wrong and the man is entitled to do something about it. And that's just not the case. It is perfectly understandable if you want to share sexual images and just with a partner privately without them being shared. But that's not what was happening. And also, women object to the term porn being used here because this is abuse material now. Once it's been shared without your consent and it's across the internet, it's not porn, because porn suggests, it's consensual. It's not porn. So both the words revenge and porn, completely problematic. But they also didn't convey what women were sharing with us about what was happening, because it's not just that images are shared without consent. They're often taken or created without consent, or women are threatened, with images being shared, and it's abusive. So this term image-based sexual abuse just better explained the range of ways that abuse was happening, and that it labeled it as sexual abuse, because many women were saying this is just like being sexually assaulted. It's a sexual violation that you've taken an image without my consent, or you've shared it without my consent. So the terminology is just so important from a survivor perspective to understand it, and from a regulatory perspective. I'm a law professor, so that's what a lot of my work's been about. But if we just talked about revenge porn, all we did was focus on someone sharing an image for revenge, for to cause distress. We didn't focus on what we've seen so much over recent years. Men trade these images in groups. It's for bonding amongst the men. So there's all sorts of motivations for why they do this. It's not just revenge, even if that. So that's why the terminology was really important.
Well, it makes so much sense to me, because I'm reminded of a memory from 25 years ago. I was in my early 20s, and a friend of mine was devastated when her ex-boyfriend, who was a boyfriend and then became an ex-boyfriend as a result of this, used a camcorder and put it on the bookshelf, and it was kind of semi-hidden, and caught them on camera, and that he shared that. And so that's what you're describing. She did nothing to invite that, and she was devastated. And that just was, the camcorder, unlike, everything on the internet that exists forever and ever that anyone on the planet can see. So it's not a new phenomenon, but technology has made it devastatingly easier. And I wonder what you would say to the question, what has the digital world done to the nature of this harm?
So, that's such an interesting example, and it's shocking that it happened to your friend. But as you say, it's not new. But of course, what's happened is it's just now so much easier, because from the camcorder, we then had all sorts of tiny hidden cameras. Men are being voyeurs through, all sorts of, pieces of equipment, tiny cameras. And of course, in the last number of months, we've got smart glasses. So, people might not have come across this. These are like Meta, particularly. They work with Ray-Ban. And so these are like trendy looking glasses, but these glasses can now record conversation without consent. And so what we're now finding is men are wearing these glasses. They're wearing them in private and maybe recording in a situation like you just described, but they're also out on the street, going up to women, talking to them, hassling them, and then uploading that content onto the internet. So the technology just keeps changing, but it's making it easier to abuse. And so you can record the material, and then obviously easier to share it, let alone if we talk about the deepfake AI technology, where you can take an ordinary image and then just alter it to make it sexual. So it's, the technology just turbocharges it, makes it so much easier and so much more hidden. It's sometimes difficult to know who's done this to you. Sometimes but sometimes you also don't know who might have taken those images of you or altered them without your consent.
And do you think society really grasps the psychological harm of image-based culture and abuse? Like, or are we just still treating it as some kind of like, oh, boys, boys, boys?
So we have got better, without a doubt. So about 10 years ago, when I first started working on this area, and when we were talking about, revenge porn, and there was no laws, for example, in the US, the UK, or around the world about it, it really was a case of, it's your fault for taking a photo and sharing it. So things have got better. That is really true. But do we properly understand it? No. Do people really understand how devastating and life-shattering this is for so many women and girls? No, I don't think they do yet, unfortunately. They think because it's online, it doesn't matter. They think well, sometimes because it is boys who are doing it, we must be really careful. And of course we must, but yeah, no, we've still got a long way to go, I think, till we really understand just how harmful and life-shattering this can be.
So are you a parent?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I've got a boy and a girl. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so parent to parent, let's just take a minute right now. What would you like parents of boys and parents of girls to know, given what you know as an expert?
Yeah. So with young people, it's even so if we start with the boys, it's about them understanding that what might be a bit of banter in their group that's, a bit funny can have such devastating consequences for the girls. So, for example, if they are, which is happening a lot in our schools all around the world now, they're using AI to like nudify the girls. So they're taking ordinary images from social media, putting them into an app straight away, getting a nude, and then often sharing them around. What they don't realize, they might think that that's fun, but actually it's devastating for those individual girls. It's devastating for those girls, although it might actually also have serious consequences for them. There's that risk as well. So I'd want them to know that. But on the other hand, what I'd also want to say to the parents is if you find out that your, child has been doing this, if they're quite young, it's not necessarily their fault wholly. It's our fault as a society because the boys are accessing these apps through things like TikTok. They're advertised in the App Store. Google tells you where to find them. It's not that they're going down into this hidden, deep, dark web to find this material. It's being presented to them as almost normal. So I really feel like with those young, particularly if you're talking 13, 14-year-old boys, I mean, by the time they're getting older, they should know better. It's our fault that they're being presented. Do you see what I mean?
I see, because you're saying policymakers should be doing more. We should be agitating for change to protect our youth.
Yeah. Yeah, boys and girls we should be protecting. And for the girls, it's even if they've taken a nude, and they've shared it, it's not your fault. You did, you might not want them to do it, but we have to, if the girls are going to come forward as well, they need to know that it's safe to come forward to explain what's happened to them without being told that they've done something wrong. That's really, really important as well. And it's the same whether you're talking about nude images or sexual assault generally, girls have got to feel able to come forward without being told, why were you there? Why did you have that drink when you weren't supposed to? I told you never to drink. They need to know that they can come and say, I'm sorry I did some of those things, but this has happened to me and it's not their fault.
Yeah, you make me think of I'm going to get the quote wrong, even though I adore Brené Brown and I should know it by heart, but something like shame cannot exist when empathy is there. And, you cannot shame someone and then have empathy at the same time, right? So you're inviting more empathy into the culture of youth right now that is being driven by all sorts of profit motives and powerful entities that are taking advantage of, the typical, I mean, we've all wanted to see each other naked at a young age, right? So like that's part of who we are as humans, and now it's being monetized.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. 100%.
So I want to quote something from the description of your book. Okay, so your book is called Exposed: The Rise of Extreme Porn and How We Fight Back. The quote is, an entire generation is learning about sex, not from experience or trust, but from Pornhub, where fantasies are constructed by degrading, misogynistic, and racist ideals that eroticize masculine dominance and normalize sexual violence. Meanwhile, non-consensual porn is destroying women's lives, a threat now supercharged by deepfakes and AI. So I want to, before we get into the content of the book, I'd like to know why you wrote the book, how was it to write the book and what you hope readers will take away?
Oh, goodness. Some of it relates back to actually, we've just been talking particularly about image-based sexual abuse and nudes and such like, because I mean, I've been doing work in this area for about 20 years. So I've seen the rise of extreme porn, that I've actually lived through that myself. But a few years ago, I was at one of these kind of international conference summit things where we had lots of the tech platforms, lots of the porn platforms, and lots of civil society. And we were talking about the horrifying problem of non-consensual nudes being taken and shared. And everyone was agreeing that it was terrible and we needed to act and, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, the elephant in the room was mainstream pornography on the mainstream sites that's, easily, freely accessible, where non-consent is a kind of core part of a lot of that material. There's voyeurism material there, there's hidden cameras material, there's the leaked material, there's the forced content, the sleep content where, consent is ignored. So it seemed to me we can't have a conversation about image-based sexual abuse and technology facilitated abuse whilst ignoring pornography. So I kind of wanted to just say, look, we've got to face what millions are watching right now. Millions right now are watching things like Pornhub. It's like 130 million every day around the world are watching Pornhub. So it's got to be having an impact and effect on us. And I just wanted to get that story out there, really. And as well, share how it's gotten worse. It is much more extreme and more violent and more harmful. But it's about the algorithms as well. We come back to where you were talking about how content is being fed to young people and to all of us. It's the algorithms driving a lot of this extreme material as well. And I wanted people to kind of know that, because I think porn's often put in this box on the side. We'll talk about tech, but nobody really wants to talk about pornography. And if we do, we think of it as, just one person sitting in the privacy of their own home, but that's not what it's like anymore. It's like a social media.
Yeah. And okay, so I understand the motivation behind the book, and I guess maybe we'll answer the question how it was to write it when we get into the content for a second.
Yeah.
And I do want to circle back to what you hope readers will take away, but I want to be clear when I do this follow-up question that I'm in no way looking to sensationalize what we're about to talk about in terms of content that you saw this progression around. But I do want to offer people who are maybe not as in the know about what's going on. I mean, some data points that I've come across, and again, I would also want to offer as a caveat, like, this is not to shame people's, sexual fantasies or what their sexual repertoire looks like at all. But there's been, I know, a growing trend towards anal sex as more of a normative. There's been choking as more of a normative going on. So I wonder if you could share a few examples of things that we might find like, really, that's happening, and that's something that's becoming more and more pervasive.
Yeah, so absolutely. And those are two very good examples. First of all, before I give another couple, I think the thing to say about, for me, what I'm focusing on in my book is what I call patriarchal porn. And so that's the porn on the mainstream sites, the X-Hamster, the X-Videos, Pornhub, etc., that is viewed by millions all the time. So I say that because there's all sorts of different types of pornography. It's a huge, vast industry. So I'm not focusing on, some of the niche pay-per-view, gay porn, queer porn, some of that material. That's not my focus. I'm talking about the material targeting basically heterosexual men on the mainstream platforms. There has been a rise in anal sex and anal material, you're right, on the platforms. Choking strangulation is a really good example because we have content studies, when people examined what's in porn from, 30 years ago, when there just wasn't that sort of content there, but we can see it now. Incest material, and when I talk about that, I'm talking about material where it is often an older man with a kind of younger looking girl, and they're having, sexual activity. I don't just mean the use of the word daddy or stepmom, for example. So there's that. There is force material. It's not, you can't find it under the label rape, but you can find it under labels like force or forced or sleeping or accidental or oops, there's all sorts of different ways that it can be there. And then there's I guess, material that is it's not unlawful, but there's a lot of spitting content, which I find interesting because when I find the stats about spitting content, I'm like, oh my God, there's a lot there. But then I speak to young women and they tell me, well, that's just, again, it's just kind of normal. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's probably enough for people to.
So I know that we both care deeply about the girls' lived experiences growing up in this era, but I wonder if we could just point a spotlight on and have some empathy for the young men, given this culture that they're growing up in. So how does this also hurt young men or men in general?
Oh, absolutely. My background is around violence against women and girls, but completely this issue around mainstream pornography is about men and boys as well, particularly younger men, because they're growing up. So some young men talk, for example, about thinking they have to, be aggressive to the girls they're with, or they have to strangle them because that's what they think is normal and that's what they think girls might want. But you also have young men, boys who are saying that their first sexual experience with like a real human is disappointing because they've spent on average about 3 years watching this stuff on porn. And I just think, goodness me, what sort of world, are we in where young men in your first sexual experience with a young girl is disappointing because of what you've been seeing in porn. And then the other point I'd make is comes back to when we're talking about these being big, profit-hungry, algorithmically driven platforms. So the empathy comes in. A 14, 15-year-old boy, I don't think wakes up one day and thinks, oh, I know, I'd like to see some incest with a little bit of rape and strangulation thrown in. They don't wake up thinking that this is what's being presented to them. And pushed to them in a way to try and keep us engaged on these platforms. So yeah, it's adversely impact. I mean, the girls are on the receiving end of an awful lot of this, both in terms of the kind of, well, it's certainly not their sexual interests that are being promoted. And a lot of it is aggressive and dominating of them. But the boys are also, they've not got the space to develop their own ideas. They've not got the space to be something other than this image of a kind of domineering, aggressive, man. That's the image that's being presented to them without any other kind of options.
Yeah, I just feel like it strips everyone from the possibility of real intimacy.
Yeah.
Right? Which is like a super beautiful part of sex.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's painful to hear, and it's painful for me to just imagine an entire generation growing up without the understanding of what lovemaking or intimacy could actually look and feel like. I wonder if you could dip into the experience you had writing the book. That must have been tough.
Yeah, it was tough at times. It genuinely was, and there's no kind of there's no covering that up. I mean, I've done work in the area for a long time. I have, but seeing some of the material, it haunts you. And for a long time, I couldn't work out why, because I've done work with survivors of sexual violence, who obviously have gone through really difficult, experiences. And I think the thing that struck me was because the thing with looking at some of this material that I do find quite horrific on porn sites is that A, millions, are viewing it, but B, also that there doesn't seem to be an awful lot of interest in it. I mean, there's more maybe than there was a few years ago, but, nobody's really wanting to talk about it much or wanting to change it. And so it was that sort of despairing feeling, I think, that was some of the real challenge in working through it. Why is nobody And why is nobody noticing that this is going on? Why are we not doing anything about, why are we not doing more about that? And it's partly because people don't want to talk about porn, But yeah, that it was challenging many times. Thank you for asking.
And what do you hope readers will take from the book?
So I hope they'll take, so for older readers, I suppose, who might imagine that, who maybe have no real idea what's on mainstream porn. I want them to know more of the reality that our young people are having to deal with, or are facing. But I also want people to come away with realizing that the debates have to change as well from 20 years ago, when, it might have been about one man's privacy in his own home, to thinking this is about these big platforms who are making a lot of money out of our data, and are capturing our sexuality and our intimacy in a way that, that's why we have to do something about it. So that's our real, and that there's hope with that. I suppose that's the other thing when we're talking about some of this difficult material. It doesn't have to be that way. This isn't, it's not been like this for so long. It doesn't have to be like this. We can change things. So that's a message of hope, actually, that I'd like people to change. But it won't happen overnight, and it won't happen unless we do something. Right. We have to act. Yeah.
Engagement. Well, you have acted, all right? So when advocating for a new law, this astounded me when I came across this. So I'll repeat. When advocating for a new law covering rape pornography, the headline that grabbed attention was that the current law protected animals and corpses better than women. Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's remarkable, isn't it? So in the UK, we had a law adopted around what was then called extreme pornography. And it covered animals, bestiality, and it covered necrophilia, sexual activity with corpses, but it didn't cover rape. And at the time this legislation was being adopted, myself and others were trying to make this argument, but it wasn't successful. The irony being that even those who are, who justify pornography, and I'm not against all forms of pornography, but those who are more pro-pornography and anti-regulation, they agreed that the bestiality stuff was wrong as well, because animals can't consent. I was like, well, women aren't consenting in some of this material either. So a few years later, myself and others, a rape crisis organization and an organization End Violence Against Women and Girls, wanted to campaign to get rape recognized as a form of extreme pornography. And so, yeah, that was the headline that took off. And from then we had the Prime Minister got on board, and the law was changed. I think because people suddenly thought, do you know what? Yeah, rape is extreme. That should be extreme pornography as well.
Right. And also in your work, you worked with a deepfake survivor, Jody, to change the law, making it a criminal offense to create sexually explicit deepfakes. Can you tell me more about that?
Oh, so Jodie's a remarkable woman who, so she had deepfakes made of her and it turned out in the end, it was someone she'd known for many years, and she'd even gone to for support, this man who was one of her closest friends. But it turned out he created, no, actually, what he did was he went on one of these forums where you can go on and you can ask for someone else to make a sexually explicit deepfake for you. So he took her photos from an ordinary Instagram, uploaded them onto this forum, and asked others to make the deepfakes of her, and they were then distributed. And they included her, forceful sexual activity in all sorts of awful ways. She found out about this. But at the time in the UK, and actually in most countries, it's not actually an offence to create the material or to ask someone else to create it. Increasingly, and including in the US, it's an offence to share it, but not to just create it. But Jodie was like, this is a violation of me, And the thing about creating a sexually explicit deepfake is it's inherently a threat. Once you know that that's there, A, it's a violation of you, but B, it can be shared so easily. Anyway, so Jodie was giving an interview and a documentary, and I was also then giving some expert legal advice, and we then worked together with an organisation, Glamour UK, a magazine, End Violence Against Women and Girls, and a politician, Charlotte Owen, to change the law, and the government supported us in the end. So it's now in the UK a criminal offence to create it or ask someone else to create a sexually explicit deepfake. And the hope is that that gets to the root cause and stops people even making them in the first place.
Right, because the essence of that is not to deny someone a sexual window. It's to deny that person to exploit someone else whose rights they haven't even been asked. Whether.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're using that person's image, identity, it's something core to your personality, and you're creating a sexual image of them without your consent, and for whatever reason. And also for not on everyone, but some women, I've spoken to, it's real treasured photographs that are sometimes being taken. I can think of one woman, Helen Mort, where she talks about his holiday photographs, graduation photographs. And so these memories are then destroyed as well. That's what this does. And like I say, once you've created it, it's a violation, but it's an inherent threat, because it can so easily then be shared. And we know what then happens once those images are out there and across the internet. Is very little you can do about it.
And I can imagine, if you're 13 or 14 years old, even if you haven't had sexual experiences yet, you could be controlled by any number of people just by the virtue of the threat that something get put out, because some people would not necessarily be able to discern whether it was a deep fake or a real picture at all. So there's just that hanging over, right?
Oh, absolutely. So that of course, that's actually the real thing that gets me most. Oh, it's just so wrong, because young women now, well, all women, but particularly young women, are having to live with this ever-present threat of being deepfaked, because there's nothing you can do to stop it. Because unless you've got no images out there, which, let's face it, most people have some images, you're at risk of being deepfaked. And that's the world we're now living in. So, many of us, women all the time are having to, we manage our lives all the time, trying to avoid threats or trying to avoid street harassment, or we think we're trying to avoid a risk of rape. And we're now also having this threat of being deepfaked as well at any moment, and what could happen. And there is very little we can do about it, but that's what, the world we're now living in, that's what, young women particularly, and I speak to students about this, it doesn't matter to me if I'm deepfaked, I'm older, I'm established, blah, blah, blah. Younger women, it's a real threat to them. And the thing is, you say, people don't know whether they're real images or not. Many people have never actually even heard of deepfakes. Lots of people still don't know this. But also young girls talk about how actually being deepfaked is a worse threat than having their kind of own nudes shared, because with the deepfakes, they've got no control whatsoever at how they're, pictured, positioned, and they're often much more abusive. So it's worse, actually, is what some young women are saying, than their real nudes being shared.
Okay, so now I'm going to dip a little bit away from the porn and talk a little bit more of the bots that are coming out. And I know that may not be your area of expertise, although I'm sure on the periphery you've come across this, which is why I want to ask the question. I remember doing a TEDx talk years ago, 7, 8 years ago, with the rise of robots that were developing like almost temperature controlled, so that it would actually feel like the temperature of a human body. I know that, they've adapted, you can order your sex bot in the right color, eyes, and with the right accent, and, add AI to the mix, and you've got the perfect partner that's always available all the time to meet your every need. I just wonder if you have some thoughts about human relationships as a result of where things could go if they really, really go off the rails.
Oh, and I think they are going off the rails, unfortunately, because you've absolutely hit the nail on the head about the concerns for into the future, because when the robot, and there are sex robots, and you're absolutely right, you can, the kind of AI voices, and you can have them all designed. They're still slightly more niche, aren't they? Because they're quite expensive for an actual sex robot. But we just don't almost need them anymore now that we've got the AI companions and the kind of AI girlfriends. And as you know, this is what we're seeing, millions using now these AI companions as tools of intimacy. And at one level, it's a really terrible reflection on society that so many people are using these for forms of intimacy and girlfriends and such like, isn't it? Because I think it just suggests such a lack in our connectedness and intimacy in society more generally, isn't it? From a perspective about violence against women and girls and women and girls, I'm also deeply concerned because many of these AI companions are reproducing very kind of sexist ideals, about that, there's a woman who's always there, always agrees with you pretty much, will do anything for you. And, there's just no understanding there of what an actual, valuable human relationship will be like. And then that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect of it is that you can create these AI characters and you can be engaging with them in all sorts of activity. You can create a character that's like a 12-year-old girl and engage in sexual chat with this 12-year-old girl. And I really worry about where that kind of thing as well is going to lead us to. And there's very little regulation over some of this activity right now. Very little regulation.
Now, I know, given that you're you are an expert in law, and that's where you've done most of the important work of legislation and advocacy, besides the legal framework of putting policies in place to regulate, what else do you think society needs to be doing or thinking about?
So for me, the law, well, A is my expertise, you're right, but it's the foundation. So I think across all of these areas, why the legal framework is important, because it lays those rules, it lays the groundwork for say, this is right, this is wrong, this is how we should be acting. But you're absolutely right that that's just a starting point. And without doubt, education, campaigns, greater conversations is exactly what we need to be having, both about, if you think about with the chatbots, again, it's about not shaming people, especially young people, when they're using them. It's also about understanding that especially teenagers, more vulnerable teenagers, are using them more. So that, perhaps because they feel that there's not the avenues, amongst, the adults or in schools to talk about any of the issues facing them. So vulnerable children are using them more, and just children using them more. So we mustn't shame in that sense, but we do need to have more of the conversations and the education with young people, without a doubt. But it is also not, I suppose, I would also want to say it's not just young people. Use of AI companions is huge amongst 18 to 35s as well, as is porn use, as is sexual violence, as is, all sorts of forms of abuse. So I also am very keen that it's not just about schools either. This is about national campaigns, education campaigns, and what have you as well, to try and shift our thinking in lots of these areas.
What came to mind as you were talking? It's like a public health crisis.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the as you exactly. And so that just as in public health areas, we have big campaigns, we need that in some of these areas. And strangulation is such a good example of that, because it's not just that strangulation could be seen as a kind of a problematic power play. It's actually really harmful for those who are being strangled. Some of the evidence about young women is it's basically giving them brain damage. There's medical evidence from MRI scans and blood tests showing it's like repeated concussion in sports. And I just don't think people know that. So, that's a major area in which I think there needs to be more education.
I did not know, and I'm devastated to hear that. But it's believable, and yes, it's Okay, so I have three more questions. I wanted to ask you, I mean, it's I suppose it's over the pond in the UK too, because you've got your prince involved, but given your expertise, or former prince, I should say, I wonder if you could comment, or if you'd like to comment on the Jeffrey Epstein-led sex trafficking operation.
Well, goodness me, those Epstein files, what a window into the world they've been, isn't it? And yeah, so in the porn context, I don't know how much there is in the US. There's a journalist in the UK, Helen Rumbelow, who's written in the Times, and she dug into those files in terms of what he was saying about pornography. And there's lots of these emails where he's sending to Epstein, sending to young girls to go on Pornhub to learn about what is expected. So it's such a clear example of the grooming that mainstream
Curriculum.
porn is how it's being used, as well as obviously his sorts of search terms. So even yeah, it's a window into as well how porn is used to groom young girls in some of these contexts and he specifically says it might seem really difficult or horrible at first, but so many people are viewing it. Ask yourself the question, if so many other people like it must be okay. He actually says that in lots of these messages. So it's just yeah. And then of course, yeah, one could go on, but even in the porn sphere, it's been so illuminating and so depressing.
Okay, so since this is a podcast devoted to empathy,
Yeah.
I believe empathy is a very, very powerful human trait that changes our relationships and could, if leveraged in a positive direction, could change the world. I wonder if you could speak to how we could integrate more empathy into the legal system writ large, but especially for victims of crimes that leave no physical scars.
Oh, absolutely. And this is one of the things that's really lacking is that empathetic treatment or understanding of victims. So some of my work with victims is asked them, what does justice mean to you? And everyone assumes, not everyone, most people, many people assume justice is like, through the criminal justice process and a conviction at the end. But that's not necessarily what women say. Women say, being heard, being recognized, being understood, just being treated fairly. Those are all the things that mean justice for them as well. And many of those, that's about empathy. That's about, I hear you, I understand you, I recognize what's happening to you. It might not be a conviction in the end because it just might not be possible, but it's recognition and understanding that is justice for them as well. But we just don't see enough of that, unfortunately. But we could get there. Because there are some police, even if you talk about police, who absolutely embody those ideals. It's just not routine.
And before I get to my last question, Claire, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I still feel my hair on ends, as I'm sure people who are listening and watching feel like discombobulated, butterflies in your belly. Like we're talking about something that seems very significant and very disturbing. Is there anything that we have not covered that I haven't asked you about that you would like to talk about?
Well, so, you're right that it can be a difficult, excuse me, a difficult conversation. You're absolutely right. But in that, I would want to also share with people that we have to hold on to the hope and the hope for change. So despite all of the aspects of our conversation, in every aspect of that conversation, things can improve and they are improving in some ways. And I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Rebecca Solnit, who talks about hope. And she talks about hope being something that we must not give away. We must not lose hope, because those who disagree with us, the large platforms, for example, want us to feel hopeless and think, oh, there's nothing we can do. Let's give up. Hope is an act of defiance, and hope is about thinking things can change and we can keep going forward. So despite everything we've said, I'd want people to hold on to hope as well. And hope's not just blind optimism, Rebecca Solnit says. It is an act. it's an active act each day. We exercise our hope in the hope of changing things. So yeah, I do that too.
I love that. I will definitely seek out that as a reference and put it in the show notes, along with a link to your book and to how people can learn more about what you do. So I always ask the same question at the end of my interview, regardless of topic, and it's been years now that I've done this. So if you would indulge, could you share a moment in your life where you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you?
Yeah, so this is such an interesting question, and one of the things I suppose that sprung to mind in the light of the kind of topics we've been talking about was it is a woman survivor that I spoke to in about 2018 whose ex-boyfriend had shared intimate images of her without her consent, and this was part of a research project. So we were having a long conversation, and she was telling me, I mean, she'd been suicidal. It had been devastating. Her small community all knew all about it. And she described it as, for example, torture for the soul. So, which is so evocative. And I've used her story in her work many times since then because of that. But at the end of the interview, it was difficult. It'd been really difficult. And I was trying to tell her about, I will do my best to share your story to try and, make things better. And I was quite emotional. And so it then flipped, and she started then trying to make me feel better. She started trying to say, don't worry. I'm feeling much better now. I'm going to be okay. How are you looking after yourself? What, are you doing this work, and what are you going to go and do now? And I was just so struck by that moment of her, despite everything she'd been telling me that she'd been through, she shifted when she saw my upset and wanted to try and make me feel better. And that has also always stuck with me in the sense of, her trying to understand me despite everything she'd gone through. And I thought, wow, what a powerful moment that was for me, actually. Yeah.
Wow, generosity of spirit,
yes. Yes.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes.
Isn't that amazing?
Exactly.
I love that story.
Yeah.
And I don't know what word you used when you were talking about how she had been, what was the word that you used for her injury? You said at the beginning, the whole experience was something.
It was devastating. It was devastating for her, or life-threatening.
You used the word soul. What was it?
Oh, she said it was torture for the soul. And torture for the soul.
And I believe that. And it makes me think about an interview I did with a military vet who fought in Afghanistan and Iraq, and not only came back with PTSD, but actually came back with what he calls, and what people are becoming, there's even centers to work to heal moral injury.
Yes.
So it sounds like the same thing, right? There are certain ways that we walk through life as human beings where we're grounded in sort of like what is appropriate for the dignity of our body and our spirit. And then there are things that we do that cross over that line. And much of what we've talked about today is crossing over the line. And it's not just doing injury to women, it's also doing injury to men. And I'm so grateful for this conversation so that we could put it out for more people to learn about it, hear about it, talk about it, and do something about it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Moral injury is such a good way of framing it. Thank you for that. Yeah, definitely.
Well, Professor Clare McGlynn, thank you so much for spending an hour with me. I want to thank you for the work you're doing. And I also want to thank all our viewers and listeners who have been with us. And we'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor.
And that is a wrap.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this conversation or found it illuminating, I hope you'll check out the other episodes from this series devoted to empathy in the age of AI. And if you know someone who would enjoy the show, I hope you'll pass it along. Before you go, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next week.